Drew here, and I try not to hold it against shows when they do a weekly release of episodes as opposed to a binge, because it's like at some point you're going to be able to watch it any way you want, so it's less a problem with the show than it is a problem with the release strategy of the streaming platform. And some shows I honestly think work better as a weekly release. Servant is not one of those shows. I binged season 2 leading up to the release of season 3, and it was much, much more engaging as a binge. I think the big thing this episode is that it's doing a lot of setup for things that we haven't seen yet, so it's a little bit hard to judge in isolation whether it was a good episode or not, because we don't know what the payoffs are for any of this. So it's setting the stage for what seems like it's going to be an interesting season, but it could be setting the stage for something as bad as season 8 of Game of Thrones. It's just hard to tell. But I really enjoyed this episode. I think that for a second episode in a row, we've had really emphasis on Leanne's perspective of the situation as she's trying to protect the family from outside forces that so far have remained unseen. And this is honestly one of the strongest aspects of the season so far, is how the directors have really found ways to make things that we don't think of as being particularly frightening or disconcerting in themselves, and made them so simply because of context. It's put us in Leanne's shoes. And this episode we see Dorothy's need for community once again, kind of bringing people into the house that could potentially be endangering little Jericho and the family. And Leanne fighting back against it, seemingly. It's a little bit unclear how the hive came down the chimney and all the bees ended up coming out to attack the people in the room, but it seems pretty clear that it was probably Leanne based on her reaction afterwards and the way she interacted with Dorothy. But in that sense, it's an interesting dynamic between Dorothy and Leanne, because whoever has the upper hand can really shift. Leanne, being somewhat of a wizard, can always just pull something like that. And the question, of course, is, Julian was like, did she go up to the roof to do it? But as M. Night, discussed previously, Leanne, her moods affect the house. So she doesn't necessarily have to go and do something for it to happen, I don't think. And it's telling that the bees that came out of the chimney and were attacking everyone in the house, they completely ignored Sean, which kind of indicates to me that it was a Leanne-related incident, and that it was Leanne's feelings towards Sean, her disposition towards him, that kept him from getting stung a single time.
My hand was right there. I was by far the closest one. I didn't get stung once.
Look, man, if you want to know about animal behavior, I'm not your guy.
And I kind of wonder if that doesn't hint at something that I've been thinking has been kind of implied could happen since the start of the show, which is a relationship between Leanne and Sean that is more than platonic. They hinted at it in the first episode, that Dorothy won't allow herself to be jealous because that would be undignified. But I feel like this season, the relationship between Sean and Leanne could cause her to become more than a little undignified by the time it's all over. Intriguingly, this episode was actually directed by Shyamalan, the daughter of M. Night, and she seems more than up to the task. There were some just excellent shots this episode that really established a creepy atmosphere, a creepy vibe, and I love how they were things that you wouldn't traditionally think of as creepy, as I said. For instance, there's this shot that circles the group that Dorothy has invited into her home in order for her to have basically this group play date for Jericho. And the way that this circles around the room and around the people doing this kind of a tracking shot in a circle, it made this moment just seem, this very, very normal quotidian moment seem very, very creepy for some reason.
Where's Oh, it's okay. Oh, wait, April's sleeping, honey.
And part of it is that this has really done an excellent job of putting you in Leanne's perspective with all the paranoia that comes with that. But a lot of it comes down to the score and just the way that it was shot. And I think there was a lot of examples of that in this episode where something that would not normally be disconcerting became disconcerting because of the way Shyamalan shot it. And I think that this perspective is one of the strongest things coming through this season. Again, this isn't the most thickly plotted show. On an incident by incident basis, it develops pretty slowly. But I think that the atmosphere and the tone are what have always intrigued me about it. And there's not as many mysteries as there used to be. I think that season 2 left us with a fair understanding of the situation. So this season, they're starting to build up the mysteries again a little bit, like what is going on? Were the people that came to install the cameras, were some of them associated with the cult? I saw someone point out online that one of them appeared to potentially be wearing different colored shoes, which could point to them being someone who doesn't know how to dress, which is something that Leanne has said is kind of true of cult members. And the fact that that's where the beehive fell down from, maybe it had something to do with them. At this point, I think it's a little bit ambiguous intentionally, whether it was Leanne or whether it was the people that came to install the cameras that caused this to happen. But I think the cameras are going to set up a really interesting element for this season, and I'm really interested to see how they're used, because I think that they can definitely use them, to show us things from different perspectives than before, and they can, definitely create more tension, through them. But we'll have to see more specific examples before I can, assess that. But I really, really think it's a good addition to the house. And I think that on the whole, I think some people are ready to be done with this show. Like they feel like there's just not enough happening. And that it's kind of played the only tricks it had to play. But for my part, I'm happy to spend more time in this house with these characters. And I think that they're finding ways to keep it interesting and fresh from my perspective. Really, there was a moment this episode where Dorothy was kind of reminded of the ambulance that came to the house to get Jericho after he died initially. And we still haven't had, it's interesting because they keep getting really right on the brink of having Dorothy remember what happened, and then they kind of pull back. And it's going to be really interesting when that shoe finally drops and when she's forced to finally reckon with what happened. So again, I think Hive was another good episode of Servant, and I'm interested to see where the season goes. But let me know your thoughts in the comments. If you're interested in seeing my upcoming reviews of Servant and other shows, please consider subscribing to the channel. And as always, thank you for watching.